Good evening, everyone. My name is Takiwa Smith, founder and executive director of Science, Engineering, Mathematics Link, and I want to welcome you to our Math and Science Career Academy's special workshop with the Georgia Audubon Society. So I am going to go ahead and turn it over to our program coordinator, Carlin Pounders, that is going to give you more details about tonight's event and our speaker.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Takiwa. So we are so excited to have this program today coinciding with Earth Day. Earth Day is a really important time for us to take a look at our habits and how they impact the environment and the other organisms that live in the environment, such as the animals and our plants, and all these things that collectively we depend on planet Earth to live on and get our resources from. So tonight we are going to be taking a look at one of the greatest aspects of our Earth, birds, and we are going to be looking at their migration patterns. And so tonight we have Kiana Leverett, Education Program Coordinator for the Georgia Audubon, who's going to be talking to us on this subject. And Kiana is a graduate of Tuskegee University with a Bachelor of Science degree in Environmental Science, Natural Resource Management. She is a specialist in natural resource management, and she has an interest in urban education and conservation. So you know she's going to have a lot of amazing things to say and share with us as it relates to us learning about this topic and, maybe even thinking of new ways of how we can, moving forward, have better habits for both us and for birds. So without further ado, I will give it over to Kiana.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can hop right into it. All right. So hopefully you guys are seeing my screen. So let's get started. So today I want you to keep in mind the guiding questions. What is migration and how does it work? I hope that I'm able to answer all of these questions for you. So when you look at all of the birds that are on this page, they're all different sizes. They have different shapes. They eat different things. They are different colors, different beak sizes. But the one thing they all have in common is that all of them, yes, all of them, every single one is a migratory bird species. And before migration was a topic that people discussed or that people even realized was occurring, there were many ideas that people had about where birds went during the wintertime. So one such idea is that birds hibernate just like bears. So in this upper left picture, there is a picture depicting the idea that people believe that swallows nested in the mud in their rice fields. Aristotle, who was a philosopher, had the idea or the belief that there are certain birds that will turn into a different kind of bird during the wintertime, and that is why you don't see certain birds during the winter. So he believed that this small black bird with the orange breast and wings turns into a robin. And another even more interesting idea is that birds turned into different organisms altogether during the wintertime. So the idea that a barnacle goose becomes a literal goose barnacle during the wintertime, which can and is a wild idea. So what is migration? It is the large-scale annual movement of all or some of a population of animals, although specifically we're talking about birds, between summer breeding grounds and non-breeding wintering grounds. So there are two different kinds of migration. There's fall migration that occurs during the fall, typically around October into November. And then there's spring migration, which is occurring right now. And as far as how scientists learn about migration, they have many, many methods. For some scientists, they will physically catch birds, and some, for smaller birds, they might band them, which is where they'll put colored tags or number tags on a bird's leg, and that will allow them to be able to, as they catch this bird over and over again, to figure out how often they're catching it, where it's being found, and for them to alert other scientists of its presence in different parts of the world. For larger birds that can handle it, they also have GPS tracking, which, as you can see on this swallow-tailed kite, they're putting a transmitter on him to see just how far he's going. And the most popular way that scientists learn about migration is through radar and satellite images. So in this other picture, you can see that they are using a radar to measure heat, because if you have a bunch of birds flying through the air, you're going to see a heat signature left when you're looking at that image from a satellite. So that is another way that scientists learn about migration. And one feature of migration is that there are things called stopover spots, which are places that a bird will stop as it's traveling to a certain destination for migration. Most birds will travel south during their fall migration during the winter, and then they will travel back north, back into North America or wherever their destination is during the spring. And there are different kinds of ways that birds will travel, but some birds will take the entire journey in one flight. Others, in fact, many, many birds, songbirds, birds of prey, birds of all different kinds, shorebirds, require stopover spots, which are spots in which a bird takes a rest. It might sleep, it might refurbish itself with more food, get some energy, and then travel on. So here you can see an example that shows that a lot of different kinds of birds, represented by all these different colors, all have similar or sometimes even the same stopover spots to their destinations. So in North America, we have 4 particular flyways. The one that we live in, which is the blue on the map, is called the Atlantic Flyway, which is because it borders the Atlantic Ocean. And then you have the Mississippi Flyway here in yellow, which follows the Mississippi River. You have the Central Flyway, which is in green, which covers the central part of North America. And then the Pacific Flyway, which covers the Pacific west side of North America. And depending on the bird, sometimes birds will take different flyways in order to reach their different destinations. So here's a map that can show you a little bit about what I'm talking about. When you look at the blue that goes over the ocean for the Hudsonian godwit, you'll see that he travels completely over water. But on the flip side, when you look over here in the green in the middle of the US, you have a whooping crane. And the whooping crane travels straight through the Central Flyway. So different birds have different ways of how they travel depending on where they start and depending on where they're stopping and if they need to stop at all. All of these things are factors on what kind of flyway a bird picks, whether they decide to go over the ocean or whether they decide that they don't want to go over the ocean at all. One migration champion that I would like to mention is a bar-tailed godwit, but another even more popular one that I want to talk about is an Arctic tern. Arctic terns migrate an average of 25,000 miles every single year. These birds are in the sky more than they are on land, which to me is crazy. And when you look at their migration map, you'll see here that the orange or dark brown is where they spend their summers. And the yellow, you can see they're not going overland, they're traveling around land for their migration, where they live below South America for the winter, which is their non-breeding season. But either way, 25,000 miles is a very, very long way to travel. Another, I would say, even more local example of a great migrating champion is the ruby-throated hummingbird. It is the hummingbird that is native to Georgia. And just to give you an idea, it weighs about as much as a penny. So if you've ever held a penny in your hand, that is how much a ruby-throated hummingbird weighs. And most of them spend their winter in Central America, and they get there by flying across the Gulf of Mexico in one flight. So they don't have stopover spots. And you can see in their maps that during the summer and the spring, they live in the southeast United States, and then they migrate through the Central Flyway and over the Gulf of Mexico to reach their final destination of Central America, which is where they live during the winter time. So this is a heat map that shows a wood thrush, which is a migratory bird, and its journey over the year. As I play this, I want you to pay attention to where the map becomes bright white, because that is an indicator of high populations of wood thrushes. And again, this data was obtained through eBird, which is people who are actually reporting seeing people just like you and me who are reporting seeing the wood thrush. So let's play this and see what happens. And you can see that as the days change, you're seeing more and more of the wood thrush. And as it becomes spring, all of a sudden, here are the wood thrush and its population heavily in the southeastern United States. And throughout the summer, now we're in the summertime, and you're seeing less and less because it's almost fall. And then as we get into fall, you start seeing more and more of the wood thrush in Central America, until finally that is where the wood thrushes are only being reported. And that is one of the reasons why we can tell what this bird does throughout the year and how it is able to travel. This is a heat map, which again is monitored by radar. So why do birds migrate? When you look at this picture, what does it tell you? This top right is the summer, so you have a full canopy. And then as you travel through the summer and the fall and the winter, the canopy becomes less and less abundant until it is barren. And so most, if not all, birds migrate because they need food. It's not because they're cold. It's not because they're scared. It is simply because of the availability of resources, because of the food that they need in order to survive the season. So in winter, food is scarce in North America. Snow covers the ground, temperatures cool down, perennial plants will lose all of their leaves and their flowers and their fruit, and resources become scarce, especially for birds. In looking at this picture, you see feeders, which are a great source for birds to be able to eat, but there's nothing else. So there are limited resources, and I'm sure that although we can't see it, that he's not the only bird around. And so birds that all live in the same area still require the same resources that they had in the spring. And when those resources aren't available, it compels them to go and search for those resources. So just a reminder, birds migrate because of a lack of food, not because of cold. They are equipped with feathers that are down feathers that help keep them warm. They also help keep them dry. So a bird won't migrate because it's cold, but it will migrate because it is hungry. And in the spring, Most of these birds are in the tropics where it's sunny all the time, there's lots of food, and I'm sure you're wondering, if a bird could live in the tropics all the time, why would they leave? And the answer to that question is simpler than you think. They tropics because they need space to raise their young. And bonus, there's no snakes that far north. So when you have birds like the bar-tailed godwit who nest down in Central America, who winter in Central America, but who nest up in the Arctic, there's more space because there are less organisms who live in that kind of cold. And because of that kind of cold, there's also less predators to predate on their nests. So there's more privacy and more nest success for them. So it makes sense to want to raise your young in a place where it is cold, but to want to spend your winter somewhere where it is warm. And specifically in North America, when the summer gets hot, it gets really hot. The days get longer, but it also brings an abundant, bountiful feast of insects that are really, really important for feeding young. Another thing about the spring, it is migration, but it is also nesting season. So birds will nest during the spring when they come back from migrating, and they feed their young almost exclusively a diet of worms and caterpillars, specific kinds of worms and caterpillars. And those types of animals are abundant in North America during the summertime, along with longer days, with plenty of daylight to catch them. And also, if I was a bird living in the tropics, I would think that I would want space to raise my own young. And so it is helpful to those birds as well when our migratory birds leave. So, do all bird species migrate? Not the chickadees, and not the cardinals. In fact, some species don't migrate at all. A lot of your backyard birds, so your cardinals, your robins, your chickadees, your wrens, your blue jays, your sparrows, crows, all of these are birds that we see often and all the time because they winter here. They don't migrate at all. They are our wintering species, our backyard birds. So there are different kinds of birds. There are residents, and residents can live in either temperate climates, which might lend them to want to change their behavior during the winter time, or they live in tropical environments where they don't have to change their behavior because of the season. And then you have migrants, who some travel short, medium, and long distances, and then partial migrants who might brood in one place, not necessarily leave their species area, but they also might move and brood potentially together with other birds during the wintertime. So a change of location, but not of location, if that makes sense. So how do birds know when it's time to migrate? There's an equation that has 4 different parts. It has to do with the changes in day length. So the days getting shorter, which they do in the wintertime. Changes in temperature. Although birds are equipped to handle changes in temperature, they still feel the cold. So when it gets colder and the day gets shorter, and because it is colder and the day is shorter, there's less food growing, like we saw earlier with the snow. When there's less food, these are all parts of an equation that really tell a bird, hey, it's time to migrate, as well as just genetic distinction of just knowing. Some birds just know when it's time to migrate, whether it's them watching other birds or them just having that feeling. It's genetic. Similar to how we as people, we experience things like fear when we're faced with danger, our fight or flight. Those are things that are just in us, instincts to protect yourself. And birds have those same kinds of instincts for migrating, which is really, really cool. So all of these things combined create what is called the migration equation. And so there are different birds that migrate at times. You have your night migrants, and your night migrants, which are the majority of songbirds, migrate at night in order to shield themselves from different kinds of predators like hawks and falcons and other birds of prey, as well as other predators that might try to get to them or see them because of their bright colors or their songs. So the majority of birds travel under the shield of night. And then you have your diurnal migrants, who are all birds that catch insects. So these migrants will know when to migrate because they go where the bugs go. And finally, you have the migration of raptors. And raptors migrate differently. Raptors will migrate during the day. And when I think of raptors, I think of vultures, hawks, eagles, all of falcons. All of these birds are birds, if they do migrate at all, they migrate during the day. And that's because these birds are larger, their bodies take up more mass, they need the heat rising from the earth. Those are called temporals, and they'll ride those temporal air currents like waves. And so that way they don't have to flap their wings as much and use up as much energy in order to move around. So if you've ever looked in the sky and you've seen a vulture or a big black bird and he's flying around in a circle and you're wondering, why is he doing that? Or how can he stay in the air so long? It's simply because he's using the heat that is rising from the earth to keep himself in the air. And that's something that's not possible for them at night because it's dark and there's no heat rising. So they need that heat during the day to be able to move around and travel. How do birds prepare for their journey? Well, birds put on a lot of fat before migration to fuel them for their long journeys. And different birds eat different things. And you can tell a lot by a bird, what a bird eats, by how its beak is shaped. So you have this dunlin, who he's in water, so he clearly might be looking in the water for something to eat. But we look at our friend the hummingbird, who weighs nothing more than a penny. He has a very specific diet. Hummingbirds are pollinators, so they only eat the nectar from flowers and sometimes a gnat here and there. And imagine preparing yourself for a one-way journey over the Gulf of Mexico on a diet of nothing but fruit flies and sugar water, essentially. So birds have different ways of knowing how they're going to make this journey. Sometimes they'll use, and more commonly, they use the sun and the stars as guides. So birds need the stars at night, for the ones that are traveling at night, to be able to know where they're going. They're able to read the stars, as well as knowing what direction you're flying by where the sun is rising and where it's setting. These are all instinctual things that a bird knows. Another way that a bird might know is by looking at landmarks, both visual and auditory. So something like hearing the ocean or seeing the ocean. They also can use their sense of smell, like being able to smell salt water. Or if you are somebody who likes to camp or go outdoors often, then I'm sure you know that if you live in a big city and then you travel to a quiet, secluded forest, the air feels different. And it's the same with birds. They have a very acute sense of smell that they use in order to figure out where they're going. And lastly, this again comes with the just knowing. They use the Earth's magnetic field to be able to tell them which is north, which is south, which is east, and which is west, and which way that they should go. So birds are really, really smart, and there's a lot that goes into how they migrate. But migration does have some pros, but it also has some cons. On the pro side, they get to escape a harsh winter, and they have a better chance of finding food for the winter in these tropical habitats. But migration can also be very dangerous, and resident birds get the first pick of nest sites. So if you are a migratory bird, it can prove difficult when you come back to where your breeding grounds for the summer and the spring, and all the birds that I named earlier, like your cardinals and your robins and your wrens, because they never went anywhere, they get first pick of where they want to put their nests, of where they want to live. And so the migratory birds are left to basically nest in whatever is left. But like I said, migration can be dangerous. They might have to deal with weather or pesticides, wind turbines, cats, building. There are a lot of buildings. There are a lot of things that can make migration very dangerous. The number one danger is habitat loss and food availability. If there's not enough habitat for a bird, especially in these stopover locations, then the bird won't have enough energy to make it across the journey, whether it's going across the ocean or traveling on land. And that can affect any bird. Domestic cats that kill 4 million birds every single day can be another problem because they don't have any competition. They're apex predators because they're domesticated. They aren't in the outdoor ecosystem, although we still find them there, or they're not supposed to be there. Something else that can cause problems are pesticides, toxic chemicals, and pollutions. If I'm growing berries in my yard for birds, but I'm putting pesticides on those plants, then the birds are also eating the pesticides. And then that could make them sick, cause them not to be able to fly, or make them weak and susceptible to predators like cats. Another big issue, especially here in Atlanta, that people are having, or that birds are having to deal with, are buildings and communication towers that kill 100 million birds every single year. Birds aren't able to see glass unless there is something on the glass to break up the image and show them that there is a physical structure in front of them. So what can happen, especially out here in Atlanta, is that birds will collide with windows thinking that they're just flying through the air. Another issue that can occur is during the nighttime, if there's too much light, if Atlanta is this bright and shining place where there are buildings that are lit all the way up at night, I'm sure it looks very beautiful, but the brighter it is at night, the more difficult it is for birds to be able to see the stars. And if they can't see the stars, then they can't migrate. Some other issues that aren't as prevalent as the ones I've mentioned are bad weather, like thunderstorms, although birds do have waterproof feathers. So it can be a more difficult journey, but it won't stop them. Light pollution, predators, other than cats, like snakes and birds of prey, and wind turbines, which aren't everywhere, but they do cause problems for birds occasionally. However, there are definitely ways that you can help. By keeping your lights off at night, if you can, leave the light on where you are and not where you're not. By growing native plants and putting out feeders, you play a direct role in lessening the blow of habitat loss and fragmentation. Keeping your cats indoors, if you have them, or reporting cats to animal control when you do see them, as well as being a citizen scientist. A lot of the data that we have on birds is because there are people just like you and I that are reporting these birds and that are telling everybody where they are. So I hope that because it is migration season and there's so much going on outside, that you take the time to go out and do something. I know it's Earth Day today, but in my opinion, every day is Earth Day. So I hope that you learned something about migration with me today.
Wow, that was really awesome. I love how you ended it with things that people can take away from this presentation and do literally tonight in order to help birds, land safely in whatever tree or habitat that they call home. I think that relates to, one question that I have as far as, so you said that there's a risk of their habitats not being there. And I know one reason you gave is if birds that don't migrate, get there first. But it was sounding like there's like a human influence on, if, their habitats are there. I just think about how a lot of times in cities in particular, you do kind of see construction that causes trees to be cut down, or, well, mainly trees to be cut down. And I just wonder if you can speak to that, the human influence there.
Sure. So with humans have a huge impact on birds and as well as their survival. And there are lots of things that we can do to help them. Oftentimes what will happen is that a bird might live in a forest and then it'll go to migrate. And when it comes back, that forest has been turned into a housing complex or a condominium. And then there is no resources for them. It's the same reason why, depending on where you live, you might see deer in your backyard and you're wondering why the deer is there. It's because there probably was a forest there before you saw the deer, before you moved into your house. So for birds, it's the same. And sometimes we can't help that their places, that their habitats are lost. But what we can do is help by putting some of it back and by preserving and taking care of the green spaces that we do have, because these are ultimately where these birds live. I would also add that there are birds whose habitats are so lost that they almost exclusively nest and live in man-built structures. And a good example of this would be purple martins. If you've ever heard of a purple martin, a lot of people will hang up these gourds or these nest boxes for them to be able to nest. Oftentimes, like you'll hear about even Georgia Audubon, like we sell nuthatch boxes because nuthatches are one of those birds that can oftentimes get crowded out in its space. And so it needs a special nest box that has a smaller hole than usual so that it doesn't get pushed out by other larger birds that when they're competing for places to lay their eggs and to put a nest. So we definitely have a part to play in the reason why birds are losing habitat. As of 1970, I believe, I think there's a study that says that we've lost over 3 billion birds since 1970. And a lot of it has to do with the loss of their habitats. And so the best thing for us to do right now, because we all don't have control over what gets built in our neighborhoods all the time, is to just do what you can where you are, whether that's putting out a feeder, whether that's putting up a bird bath, whether that's planting some plants that you know will attract birds, that'll make them feel more comfortable, more at home, and specifically planting native plants, because birds grow genetically with the plants that are in the space that they live in. So if you plant plants that are foreign to them, then they're not going to eat those plants. And then the birds won't have enough food, and what we know could happen if they don't have enough food. So all that to say is that there are definitely things that we can do to help.
Wow. And then something else that stuck out to me was, someone brought up earlier today this phrase, this term of having a bird brain, right? I think that because they're such small creatures, people believe that their brains are equally tiny and, they're not that smart. But that slide and that information that you went over about just how they know that it's time to migrate just really blew me away. And I think that it proves that birds are so much smarter than we are that we think, or that we're led to believe. And hopefully this question is related to that, but really I wanted to ask, as far as I'm just so curious about, so I wanted to hear about how they're able to keep warm, especially when they're traveling obviously they're traveling to warmer climates for food, like you said, but, how much warmth do their feathers provide? And I know some animals, like bears, I believe they have an extra layer that keeps them warm for, the colder climates. But if you can answer that, and then also related to that, if you could just talk a little bit more about how they are able to fly nonstop, without how they're able to do that without stopping, with so little food. Like, it's just amazing.
It is amazing, and I will say that birds have definitely adapted to weather and to migration. There are even birds that don't migrate. For example, if you think about Carolina chickadees, their brains increase in size during the winter because they'll typically have their nuts and they'll bury their nuts. So if they bury 700 nuts and then they only are able to find 600 of them, and those other 100 could become trees. But to answer your question, birds are able to fly because they have two different kinds of feathers. The first kind of feather is what's called a contour feather. Those are the feathers that are on the wings. They're usually wider, they're thicker, they're able to help them fly. And then there are the down feathers, which are the feathers that help keep them warm because of how packed they are. So they literally hold heat in, which helps the bird keep its body warm. But bird feathers are made of a substance called keratin, and keratin is a very protective substance. Your fingernails are made of it, your hair is made of it, the hooves on a horse are made of it, the antlers on a deer are made of it, and the claws on your cat are made of it. So keratin is a really strong substance, and all feathers are made of this keratin, which really provides a protective layer. Similar to how your hair keeps your head from getting cold, that's the same way that feathers are able to keep a bird from getting cold. And then another thing that helps them fly is that their bones are hollow. So they don't weigh that much. And because the bones are hollow, it allows them to be more acrobatic and to glide and to not use as much energy to travel long distances or to fly for a long period of time. And also, another fun fact is that because birds are so smart, some of them, even more common ones that you might not think of, have the ability to mimic, have the ability to talk. Like, for example, when you think about crows, which are part of the corvid family, they're able to speak to us if they're trained properly, just like parrots, so they can talk. If they hear you say something for long enough, they're also smart enough to know that if they have an acorn or a nut that they want to open, that all they have to do is drop it in traffic and wait for a car to run it over to get it open. So they're smart enough to adapt to their environments. And that's not just crows. A lot of different birds are smart enough to adapt, and that's what they've been doing.
So amazing. You are a bird expert. So obviously that's why you work for the Georgia Audubon.
I would just call myself a nature nerd who really, really likes birds.
It's amazing. I have learned so much from this presentation, and for those watching and who view it, they're probably going to also learn some new things. I mean, did not know that their bones are hollow, and the fact that the mention of keratin, the same thing that we have, birds have too. Just being able to know that connection is so helpful for youth and adults to realize, how connected we are to nature and, the animals that exist in nature, and why on a day like this, on Earth Day, it's so important that we make the right choices to ensure that we're all living healthy and safely on this planet Earth, because it's the only one that we have right now. So with that being said, we definitely want to thank you for doing this presentation today. If there are any last words that you wanted to share, of course, we're based in Atlanta, and I'm sure that the Georgia Audubon has some opportunities for youth and adults to, go on hosted bird watching and trail activities. So if you have any last words that you want to share, I'll give you opportunity to do that now.
Sure. I just want to thank you again for the opportunity to talk to you, to SEMLink about birds and migration. I hope that you learned something today. I also would encourage you guys to check out our website. There are lots of resources on there. People that want a bird or plant plants in your yard, about upcoming events that we have, because we always have going on. So I just encourage everyone to check that out. And remember that every day is Earth Day, and that you should treat every day like it is Earth Day, because it will ultimately change the way that you look at things. Thank you again.
No problem. So with that being there. Did you want to add something, Tequila?
I was waiting for you to say the upcoming programs, and then I'm just going to thank Kiana and tell everybody good night.
I'm sorry. I promise you, I learned so many awesome things that I'm still like processing through my mind. But Kiana brought up a lot of relevant information related to our next program taking place this Saturday, which is on birds again, but it is on their eating habits. So if you watched this and you enjoyed it, please make sure you register for our STEM in the City on the eating habits of birds taking place from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern this Saturday. We are also putting a survey in the chat. And so whether you're watching this live or the replay, please make sure you fill it out so that you can provide your feedback on what you want to see in the future.
And once again, Kiana, I want to thank you so much. We also always learn so much from you. Carlin's going to put Georgia Audubon in your website in the chat. You are one of our favorite partners because, we're about exposure, right? And I know nothing about birds, and Carlin knows nothing about birds. And so whenever we find a partner that can bring science, that no one thinks about, right? We see birds all the time. For me, they chirp too early in the morning, but there are kids that are interested in birds, and to know how they can explore that interest and possible careers that they can have because they like birds, because they like nature, because they want to help make the world a better place and make sure that we have habitats for birds. And so we always appreciate partners that allow us to expose kids to STEM that they don't automatically think is STEM, right? Birds are STEM, right? But we just think there are things flying around, or the chicken that we eat, or the quail that we eat, but birds are a part of our ecosystem habitat. And something that I remember my grandmother saying, like, you can watch birds and tell like danger is coming. And so thank you so much for all your knowledge about birds, and hopefully kids who are interested in birds can do that. Also, birding is a great activity for families to do, right? That is, I won't say free, but it can be low cost, right? Like, you can take your eyes, your cell phone, and a birding app. Is that correct, Kiana?
Yeah, there are a lot of free birding apps. I would recommend, if you are first starting out, to check out eBird, check out Merlin, that was created by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. There's also BirdNet that helps you play sounds. There's so many different apps that you can use that are free that'll help you identify birds. So even if it doesn't matter if you have binoculars, it doesn't matter if you have all the knowledge, if you just have a willingness to learn and some patience, it really does pay off as time goes on.
Okay, and we'll try to put those in the chat as well. So thank Kiana. And everyone if you're interested in birds, this is a great time to watch them, right? During migration.
Yep,
All right.
spring migration is happening. Enjoy the rest of your night, everybody.
Enjoy your night. All right. Good night.